Welcome back to Baithak. This is your host, Aryan Mokhtar. Today, Undercover, we'll be talking about the infrastructural shortcomings of Darjeeling and also about the recent developments on the Mall Road. We'll also be doing a short case study about the Indian Gorkhas and continuing our discussions from the previous few episodes. Today, I wanted to have a short discussion on the infrastructural shortcomings of Darjeeling. The recent rains and the recent influx of tourists have really put a lot of pressure on Darjeeling's feeble infrastructure, and this has really been in display over the past few days. Now, the main issues that we have, especially, are with the roads, the drainage system, the parking, as well as the waste management. Now, when it comes to the roads, they have been very dismal to begin with. The Teesta River floodings really showed that, and I believe we need to have a better, more profound solution to this. Maybe use a little bit of better technology of asphalt, or maybe study exactly why the rains are really affecting our roads so much and destroying them over the period of at least a year, and at least have the roads last for at least 2 or 3 years, or maybe even hopefully 5 to 6 years. That way we can really stop construction of these roads on a yearly basis and really stopping traffic. And this has been a major issue for a lot of us. Now, especially the roads towards the villages and the more rural areas are a completely different matter to contend with, and that has also been a huge problem. If we could really look at these avenues and these sectors, we could really improve the infrastructure of Darjeeling. There's also been another solution to maybe hopefully reopen the old military road, which moves from Kersiong up to Chimney, from Chatakpur, rejoining the main road somewhere in Jorbungalow. Now, this would be, I believe, a very good solution because it was professed that this road would actually be used for goods vehicles and the main public could use the main Hillcart road. And I believe that would be very effective because mostly the traffic pressure comes from these goods vehicles, these large goods trucks, creating a havoc for the main public. And if they could use a different route and the main public could use a different route, I believe that would be a very good solution. So I believe these are things that really need to be looked into. Another issue, of course, is drainage. The recent rains have really showed how horrible the drainage system of Darjeeling is and how we're still relying on the centuries old infrastructure that was laid out by the British for a population of hardly 10,000 to 15,000, and now the population has boosted up so high, and we're still relying on that feeble architecture and infrastructure, and it has really affected the drainage systems. A big effort needs to be put in by the Darjeeling Municipality to really counteract that. Also, parking has always been a big issue, especially with the tourist seasons and the large amount of tourist vehicles that roam around in Darjeeling. Parking has been a major issue, and parking actually contributes to traffic because without proper parking spaces, people end up parking in the road itself, and which again puts a larger pressure on traffic and really halts the entire ecosystem of Darjeeling. Along with that, waste collection and management has always been a big issue in Darjeeling, and I believe the only solution we have now is maybe hopefully a privatization of the entire sector by which we could recruit companies and then hopefully get that entire process of collection and that entire process of waste management far more efficient. The reason why I talk about this is because I want to see a proper economic boom in Darjeeling, and without a strong foundation of good infrastructure, that can never happen. Now, there is a lot of money that can be made in Darjeeling, but the infrastructural shortcomings really affect it because such destruction of roads, such destruction of the drainage, such lack of parking spaces, a lack of proper waste management really affects the economy of Darjeeling, and without a proper base of infrastructure, that cannot really happen. So hopefully we'll see better results in this. Another interesting thing that I wanted to talk about was the recent removal of stalls from Mall Road and Nehru Road. Darjeeling Municipality recently put out a notice on 25th of June that all hawkers and all vendors and all stalls will be removed from this area. Now, I feel this is a very controversial, I'm not sure actually, but personally I feel this should be a very controversial move by the Darjeeling Municipality, because as someone who grew up in Darjeeling, during the time period where the entire Nehru Road from Kevinters all the way to the entrance of the Mahakal Mandir into Mall Road used to be covered and used to be full of hawkers. It was an integral part of Darjeeling, and the removal of that has, I feel, lost a lot of charm of Darjeeling. It has, of course, brought a different facade of Darjeeling where it brought heralded, I believe, almost heralded a new age or new era of Darjeeling, which would be much more commercial and much more infrastructural in nature. But I haven't really seen that. So I just really wanted to know your thoughts about what you feel about the hawkers and stalls being removed from this area. Today, I really wanted to do a short case study about what it means to be an Indian Gorkha. Continuing on our discussions about identity, I feel like it really helps to have a little bit of background knowledge about our people. Let's start with the term Gorkha itself. Now, there's a lot of discussions about where this term exactly came from, but there's a large consensus that it comes from the Kingdom of Gorkha, of which Prithvi Narayan Shah was a member. Now, this just shifts the question about where does the Kingdom of Gorkha get its name from? And it's mostly believed that it borrows its name from the big temple that resides in that area of the Gorkha kingdom, which is dedicated to Sri Gorakhnath, who was a prolific yogi during his time and is considered a Maharishi of the Hindu religion. Now, Sri Gorakhnath and yogi was a prolific yogi and who believed on the teachings of Adi Shankaracharya, and basically wanted to bring back the Vedantic knowledge of Hinduism back to the Indian subcontinent. Now, this comes in stark contrast with Buddhism because this is the time period when Gautama Buddha really was prolific in his teachings, and this is the time period where the Hindu religion had become a lot corrupted and a lot of people had started shifting towards Jainism and Buddhism. Now, to battle this, Adi Shankaracharya actually started reforming the entire Hindu religion and started bringing it back to its roots of Vedantic principles. And Yogi Gorakhnath actually continued this practice, and that's why he was so revered by even the Kingdom of Gorkha, because the Kingdom of Gorkha was actually a Khas Upper Bhamasra community which actually moved from the Sanskrit communities of India. Now, again, we come back to why Gorakhnath was named Gorakhnath, and Gorakhnath actually means Gorakh, meaning a protector of cows. And so it really speaks about the Hindu history of the Indian Gorkha people. And I believe it stands in stark contrast to what it means to be a Nepali. Now, where does the term Nepali come from? Nepali comes from, it's mostly believed, comes from a rishi who was named Muni. Named Muni was a rishi who actually protected the Kathmandu Valley, and Ne from name Muni, and Pala meaning a protector. So Ne Pala means the people who were living in the Kathmandu Valley and under the protection of Ne Muni. So I believe the Indian Gorkha people can't really identify with that because it brings a lot of connection back towards Nepal, and you need to actually be a part of that community to actually be referring to yourself as Nepali and living in the societies of Darjeeling and living in a very distant communities from Kathmandu Valley itself. I don't think that the term Nepali actually relates a lot to us. But the term Gorkha actually means a lot because we are now back in the land of Adi Shankaracharya and Yogi Gorakhnath. So brings a kind of a poetic balance as well, I believe, because the Indian Gorkha community is starkly divided between in religion. We are mostly Hindus or Buddhists, and Yogi Gorakhnath was actually one of the prolific Maharishis who tried to bring back the societies of Buddhists back into Hinduism. And I believe it's a kind of a nice irony that we are named after such a prolific rishi. Now, of course, this means that the term Indian Gorkha is a very Hinduistic term, and it may seem to believe that the Buddhists of the Indian Gorkha community may not want to relate to that so much. But again, Buddhism is a part of Hinduism and is considered part of the Sanatani religion. So again, that I feel is a big discussion to have, and I believe I will shelve that discussion for later. So let's just move on. Now let's talk about a little bit of the demographics. And this, I believe, is a very interesting discussion because as per the 2011 census, there were almost 30 lakh Indian Gorkhas living within India. And the population of these people is quite sparsely spread out within the Indian subcontinent. Now, of course, the main hub of the Indian Gorkha communities has to be the Darjeeling Hill region, along with the Gorkhaland Territorial Administration area. This constituted almost 10 lakh Gorkhas back in 2011, and considering the recent population rise, I believe that number would be closer to 12 to 14 lakhs in today's 2024 day. Now, the second most populated place by Indian Gorkhas is actually Assam, coming in at around 5 lakh Indian Gorkhas living in mostly the eastern regions of Assam. Now, this number was actually much higher, and we'll actually come to that discussion later on. The third populous center of Indian Gorkhas is actually a very interesting one because it is the only state within India where Indian Gorkhas actually have a majority of population. That is actually in Sikkim, and there's around 3.5 lakh Gorkhas which live within Sikkim as per the 2011 census. I believe that number would be closer to 4 lakh in today's time, and that 4 lakh is out of a total 6 lakh of Sikkimese people, the entire population of Sikkim. So this is the only state within the Indian subcontinent where the Indian Gorkhas actually live in a majority and actually have a majority in the population, basically. So I feel that's a very interesting thing to consider. After that, we also have almost a similar amount of population in Uttarakhand, with Uttarakhand coming at 3.4 lakhs. Now, I believe this number has risen in the past few years, and Himachal also comes quite close with around 2 lakh Indian Gorkhas living in Himachal Pradesh. Now, another very interesting factor is that there's around 50,000 Gorkhas living in Maharashtra and the areas near Goa, which I believe came out of the blue because, like, you can really understand why Indian Gorkhas are living within these boundaries of Nepal, Uttarakhand and Himachal being on the more left side of the Nepal borders, and Darjeeling and the northeast regions being on the right side. But how did we end up in Maharashtra? I think that's a very interesting discussion, and I will be researching further into that and actually discussing about that. Now, if we look at the northeastern regions, Arunachal stands at around 94,000 Gorkhas, Meghalaya stands at around 52,000 Gorkhas, Manipur stands at around 45,000 Gorkhas, Nagaland at 34,000, and Mizoram at a feeble 8,000 Gorkhas. Now, these numbers, as per the 1991 census, were actually, and as per the 1960 census, were much higher. But there was actually a movement by the Kasi Students Union and a lot of other communities and associations actually also supported this movement, which actually drove out large populations of Indian Gorkhas from the northeastern communities. Now, it was essentially considered as an ethnic cleansing of Indian Gorkhas, and that's why a lot of people actually ran away from the northeastern regions, and as we felt not very welcome in those areas. That's the reason why even in Assam today we mostly only inhabit the eastern portions, because from the western portions we were actually driven out. So I believe that's also a very important factor as to why Indian Gorkhas have this animosity and actually have this kind of a feeling of bitterness towards the northeastern communities, and actually feel quite offended when we are talked about as part of the northeast communities, because the northeast communities have always been very hostile towards us. But of course, you cannot deny the similarities in the community and also similarities in the cultures and traditions. But I feel that there's a lot of bad blood and a lot of animosity between the Indian Gorkhas and the northeast communities, which really needs to be delved into. Now, this is more or less the demographic discussions of the Indian Gorkhas, and it really brings to nature about how Indian Gorkhas are not just in the Gorkhaland territory. Out of the 29 lakh, it's just 10 lakh people who live in the Gorkhaland territory, and there's a large population which lives almost like we are just 1/3, and 2/3 of the Indian Gorkha population actually live outside of Gorkhaland. So when we talk about Indian Gorkhas, when we talk about the communities, when we talk about the issues that are plaguing us, we really need to consider the 2/3 of our population who are living outside of Gorkhaland and are more or less suffering the same issues. And I believe this will bring a much more holistic approach of development for our communities. I really wanted to talk about this comment that was left on my video last time, and it was by one of my friends, and he was talking about what the process would be, and what the process would be to exactly create a separate language and actually establish that moving forward. Now, he also mentioned that we have already been established as one of the official languages by the Indian Constitution. So, moving forward, how can we have a better impact, and how can we actually separate that? And I think that's a very interesting discussion. The first step towards creating a new language is, of course, standardization. We need to look at our entire language, codify it, mention down all the different words, and create a dictionary which will be separate from the dictionary which the Nepalis use. So I think that would be the first step, a standardization procedure, because once that takes place, and once we actually have a book which we can refer to our language, we can obviously create a standardization process by which we can start translating words into our language. We can start translating books where writers can start referring to these books to actually write out pieces. So I believe standardization and creation of a Indian Gorkha dictionary will be the first step. The second step, of course, would be to name this language. Now, there was a attempt at this by a few prolific members of the Nepali Sahitya Sammelan, and they actually came down to around, I believe, two names. One was Khasa, going back to its original roots of the Khasa kingdom, and the second was, I feel, Gorkhali. And now both of these are good contenders for a name, but I think once we choose one and once we establish one which is separate from the word Nepali, which, as we previously discussed, does not really relate to us. So we can't really call our language Nepali when it's already harkening back to our roots. So a new name and a new dictionary would be one of the best steps to start creating that separate identity. After that, I feel the best positions and the best steps we can take is to actually start creating literature in this, start creating works of art in this. And there's already been a lot of works by Indra Bahadur Rai and a lot of other prolific Indian Gorkha writers, and maybe codifying that, using that as a reference point for the creation of this language, and essentially stepping off from there and allowing a more natural flow and natural creation of the language. So there needs to be deliberate steps taken to this, but it also needs to kind of go with the natural flow of the creation of a separate language. So I believe that would be a very effective way to look at it. That's all for today. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Godspeed. Until the next episode.